It suggests something of the paradox that I want to explore, and something of the integration of experience that takes place as we enter into that paradox. Remember, Jacob was in just cheated and lied. He wasn't in a very healthy moral state. But the experience that he had at that deep unconscious level rectified him and reintegrated his moral purpose with his life. It's a very potent symbol, and it can serve as a key to understanding the meaning of our more difficult experiences. To turn the key and to open the door to wisdom, we have to be prepared for an inversion or a turning upside down or a turning inside out of our usual way of making sense of things, our usual way of reasoning. And this symbol, as I say, is like a key that allows us to see things from this other perspective. The door to heaven that Jacob recognized in that place where he had been visited by God and seen the rhythm of life, the going up and the coming down. That door to heaven is a portal of paradox. We go into heaven through paradox, in which opposites are united. Our usual way of describing or arriving at this portal is crisis. When crisis happens in our life, we are thrown very often into chaos, into fear. But if we can recognize the place, that God is in this place of crisis, then we can grow through it. And to grow through it always means to reconcile and to integrate aspects of our experience that at one point seem irreconcilable and contradictory. So that's why I think it's helpful for us to look into the nature of crisis and what happens, what we feel like when crisis happens, when things suddenly go out of control and are no longer predictable. We are very conscious of living in a time of crisis. It's not perhaps just the invention of the media, although the media likes to keep us constantly on the edge of our seats with new crises. But there are real crises in our world. We've just come through a major financial crisis that seemed to have threatened the basic way in which business is done around the world. We seem to have come through it, but it scared people deeply. We are conscious enough of a social crisis, almost indefinitely, almost continuously, and political crisis. We're also conscious of living in an ecological, environmental crisis. So, if all crises were just political, economic, and social, or even environmental, we might not feel so challenged by it. And often we do withdraw into our own private worlds to escape from the fears created by global crisis. But crisis also hits us at a personal level, and it can hit us at any moment. I just had an email today from a friend of mine who his family run a restaurant. Everything was going beautifully. The restaurant was doing good business for a long time. and there was an explosion in the kitchen. Somebody put a match to the wrong gas outlet, and several of their employees were very seriously burned. Horror, you know, and multiple crises suddenly, in an instant, created. So we know we don't like to think about it too much, and I'd like to come back to this question of not thinking about the imminence of crisis later. But personal crisis is a recurrent feature of our lives. We may not live in permanent crisis, sometimes people do, but we are, most of us, conscious that there are periods of our lives. Our marriage might be in crisis. Our health might be in crisis. We may lose someone we love very deeply. Our lives are suddenly thrown into disarray. Whether it's an emotional loss, usually at the heart of every crisis there is an experience of loss. The way we were familiar with doing things or predicting what we would do tomorrow, in a crisis that is blasted away maybe in an instant. One of the things about crisis is that you can't choose a crisis. It comes, if not totally unexpectedly, but there's nothing you can do about it. It's enforced. And when you are in a crisis, you are, by definition, no longer in control. That's why it feels so frightening. And out from that sense of losing control comes fear, panic even, or hysteria at a social level. Because the way we perceive reality has become deconstructed immediately, instantly. So no one would choose a crisis. If you choose a crisis, you still think you're in control of it, and therefore it isn't a crisis. But we also, hopefully, know that we can look back after a period of time, maybe a long period of time, and say thank you for that crisis. I learned something that I would never have learned any other way. People have said that to me after going, weeks before they die, after a long, painful, difficult, terminal illness. They will say, I'm really grateful for this, what I've been through, and even the pain and the loss and the grief and the anguish, all of that I would willingly go through. It's difficult to imagine someone saying this, but they do. I would willingly go through it again because of what I have learned through it. So sometimes, not always, but sometimes we can look back on a crisis with that feeling of gratitude and having been enriched by it. And even in the midst of a crisis, we may at times have that awareness that what is happening is ultimately going to produce good results. That there is a meaning and a goodness at the heart of it, even if we can't express that, or even if there seems to be an irrational explanation for it. And in those situations, when we see the value of a crisis, either later or at the time, it's as if the feeling of falling, of descending, the free fall of a crisis, being out of control, that has suddenly been